Lesson 32: Reusing Logic with Custom Hooks. 1. Introduction. Hello everyone. Today we will explore how you can reuse logic in a modern component-based UI framework by creating what are called custom hooks. We'll talk about what they are, why they matter, how to create them, and when to apply them, so you and your teams can build cleaner, more maintainable applications. 2. Custom hooks. Sharing logic between components. Imagine your application needs to reflect a user's network status. You want to detect when the user goes offline or returns to online, and you want your UI to respond accordingly. You might build several components that duplicate very similar logic, a piece of state tracking whether we're online, and a side effect that listens to browser events for online, offline changes. When you have two or more components that include essentially the same logic, you are missing an opportunity to abstract that logic away into a reusable unit. By extracting that shared logic into a custom hook, you can keep your components simpler, letting them express what they do rather than how they do it. 3. Extracting your own custom hook from a component. To perform the extraction, we ask, take the repeated state management and event subscription logic, move it into a separate function that follows the convention of a hook, and then call that function inside each component instead of re-implementing the logic in each component directly. By doing so, each component becomes more focused on its own role, for example, displaying status, or enabling, disabling a save button, while the custom hook handles the underlying mechanism. That means fewer errors, less duplication, and more clarity in the component code. Your components now express intent. I want the online status, rather than details. I subscribe to events, update state, clean up subscriptions. 4. Hook names always start with use. There's a naming convention. Custom hooks must begin with the prefix use, followed by a capital letter. This naming is not just stylistic. It signals to the framework and to your tooling that this function may call other hooks and abide by certain rules around component, render lifecycles. If you name something without that prefix, you risk confusing other developers or running into issues such as linting or runtime errors because the toolchain assumes only use prefixed functions call hooks. Additionally, functions that do not call hooks should not be named with use because they do not participate in the component's lifecycle in the same way. This distinction helps maintain clarity, maintainability, and correct tooling behavior. 5. Custom hooks let you share stateful logic, not state itself. An important nuance: when you extract logic into a custom hook, you are sharing the logic, but you are not sharing the actual state instance across components, unless you explicitly cross component boundaries in other ways. In other words, each time a component calls that custom hook, it gets its own independent state and effect scope. The components may appear to react in unison, for example, both noticing going offline at the same time, but behind the scenes they are each running their own instance of the hook. If you do want components to share the same piece of state, that is a different pattern, one you'd achieve via state lifting, context, or some external store, not simply via a custom hook. Understanding this distinction helps avoid subtle bugs where you think you're sharing state but you're not. 6. Passing reactive values between hooks. Custom hooks run on every render of the component that calls them, just like component body logic. Therefore, they must be written with the same discipline you use in component code. They should be pure, in the sense that they don't contain unpredictable side effects beyond what the hook explicitly does, and they must handle props and state just as a component would. Because they run on each render, custom hooks can accept parameters derived from component props or state. That means you can chain hooks, call one hook that returns a value, then feed that value into another hook, and so on. The values stay in sync because the component renders cause the hooks to rerun with the latest values. This allows you to build abstraction layers. One hook might handle joining a chat room connection given a server URL and room ID, Another hook might handle tracking online, offline status. You can combine them as needed. 7. Passing event handlers to custom hooks. Often your custom hooks may need to accept callback functions or event handlers from the component, letting the hook perform generic work while the component customizes what happens when certain events occur. That's fine, but you must be careful about how you manage dependencies and resubscriptions inside the hook to avoid unnecessary reconnects or affect reruns. One improvement technique is wrapping the passed-in handler so that the hook's own dependencies remain stable, avoiding triggering the hook logic on every render due to handler identity changes. This allows the UI component to change handlers freely without causing the underlying hook to re-establish connections or subscriptions unnecessarily. 8. When to use custom hooks. Not every little piece of repeated code deserves a custom hook. Some duplication is acceptable and not harmful. That said, when you are writing side effects, for example subscribing to external systems, performing data fetching, setting up timers or event listeners, you should ask yourself, could this logic be clearer if I wrapped it in a custom hook? Extracting it often improves readability, separates concerns and makes intent more explicit. The general rule of thumb: if you find yourself writing similar code in multiple components, or a component becoming cluttered with non-UI logic, it's a strong candidate for extraction into a custom hook. The goal is to keep your component code expressive and focused on what it does, while the custom hook handles how it does it. 9. Custom hooks help you migrate to better patterns. One of the hidden advantages of extracting logic into custom hooks is future-proofing. As the framework evolves, new APIs may emerge that make older patterns obsolete or less optimal. If your logic is wrapped inside a custom hook, you can migrate the hook's internals to use the newer API without changing the components that depend on it. For example, imagine that your custom hook now relies on a newer subscription API or new built-in hook that the framework provides. You can update your custom hook implementation, and your components remain untouched. This separation gives you agility and maintainability as the ecosystem matures. 10. There is more than one way to do it. Finally, keep in mind that while custom hooks are a powerful abstraction, they are not the only way to solve every problem. Sometimes declarative CSS, or simply organizing your code differently, may make more sense. The key is to strike the right balance. Use hooks where they meaningfully reduce duplication and increase clarity, but don't force every little piece of logic into a hook just for the sake of it. Remember, abstraction is a trade-off. The best abstractions make you more productive without hiding too much or becoming inflexible. Always choose boundaries that make your codebase clearer, easier to reason about, and more adaptable. 11. Recap. To summarize, custom hooks allow you to extract and reuse stateful logic across components. They must be named with the use prefix and must abide by hook rules. They share logic, not the same state instances, across components. They enable passing reactive values between hooks and accepting event handlers from components in a robust way. Extract a custom hook when logic is repeated, complex, or involves side effects. Wrapping logic in custom hooks helps future-proof your application and align with evolving framework patterns. Always consider whether the abstraction actually improves clarity and maintainability. It's not a silver bullet. 12. Closing. In closing, I encourage each of you to look at your codebase, identify spots where logic is duplicated, where components are burdened with subscription or side effect code, and ask, can this be extracted into a custom hook? By doing so, you'll create more declarative, readable components, reduce duplication and set the stage for easier evolution of your application as the framework and ecosystem evolve.